Dr. Jonathan Carter had always been a man who trusted in what he could see, touch, and measure. At 66 years old, he had spent more than 4 decades building a career rooted firmly in science, logic, and undeniable fact. Renowned across America and beyond as one of the leading geologists of his generation, he was celebrated for unraveling complex geological mysteries, from the towering peaks of the Rocky Mountains to the hidden caverns of Kentucky's Mammoth Cave system. Colleagues respected him. Universities sought his insights. Even governmental agencies regularly consulted his expert opinions. Yet, for all his accomplishments and accolades, Jonathan remained quietly skeptical about anything beyond scientific reason. To him, spirituality, religion, and certainly anything supernatural belonged in the realm of myth and imagination, not reality. In March of 2025, just as winter's final chill reluctantly yielded to spring, Jonathan received a phone call from an unknown number with a Washington, D.C. area code. A mysterious voice invited him to a highly classified meeting. Days later, he found himself in a stark conference room in the Pentagon, surrounded by military brass and government officials in impeccably pressed suits, their faces gravely serious beneath the cold, fluorescent lights. Jonathan's heart quickened. Something monumental was clearly underway. After an initial exchange of pleasantries, the officials presented him with a dossier thick with satellite images, electromagnetic readings, and strange geological anomalies, all centered on a remote, tightly restricted region, deep within the frozen heart of Antarctica. The project, he was told, was so sensitive that very few even knew of its existence. Jonathan's curiosity was piqued, yet something felt slightly off. He flipped through the glossy photographs, his sharp eyes catching strange, symmetrical patterns, shapes too precise, too perfect, to be purely natural formations. His pulse quickened as the head of the operation, a stern, silver-haired man named Colonel Robert Jennings, leaned forward and explained the mission. "Dr. Carter," Jennings said gravely, "we're detecting unusual electromagnetic signals approximately 2.5 miles beneath the ice. No geological phenomenon we're aware of can explain these readings. Our intelligence suggests that whatever is buried down there may predate recorded human history. We need someone we can trust, someone respected, someone experienced, to lead the scientific team." Jonathan hesitated for only a brief moment before accepting. After all, as a scientist, the possibility of uncovering a revolutionary discovery beneath Earth's most remote and hostile continent was too tempting to resist. He returned home, packed his belongings, and prepared to leave immediately. Days later, he boarded a military transport plane bound for McMurdo Station, Antarctica's largest research facility. The biting Antarctic air, well below 0 degrees Fahrenheit, greeted Jonathan and his carefully selected team of engineers, geologists, and military personnel as they stepped onto the stark white landscape of the continent. He felt a sudden chill run down his spine, not from the cold, but from an inexplicable sense that this mission was not as straightforward as it appeared. From McMurdo Station, the team traveled another 300 miles inland, deeper into Antarctica's vast and desolate interior, arriving at a heavily fortified research outpost constructed specifically for this project. Jonathan immediately noticed armed guards patrolling the perimeter, sophisticated surveillance equipment scanning the surrounding ice fields, and a strictly enforced communications blackout. Despite his unease, he set to work, driven by the familiar comfort of scientific inquiry. His instruments soon picked up the mysterious signals, a repeating pulse precisely every 108 minutes, emanating from far beneath their boots. Even Jonathan had to admit the regularity was oddly rhythmic, almost lifelike. As the days passed, Jonathan became increasingly troubled by the secrecy surrounding the mission. Each night, the sky above their camp seemed to shimmer oddly, like rippling water. Equipment malfunctioned frequently, GPS signals inexplicably drifted, and whispered conversations among team members hinted at shared unease. The rational scientist within him argued that these anomalies were merely consequences of the extreme conditions. But deep inside, Jonathan couldn't shake a growing sense of dread. One night, while reviewing radar data in the dim glow of the research station, he overheard two soldiers whisper anxiously, "This isn't right. We're digging somewhere we shouldn't." He dismissed their comments as superstition at first, but the words lingered, echoing in his mind long after he'd crawled into his sleeping bag that evening. Jonathan rose early the next morning, stepping outside into the crisp, icy air. He gazed across the endless white expanse, an unforgiving environment where survival itself was tenuous. Yet, he knew beneath his feet lay secrets of a world that might challenge everything humanity believed about itself. Despite the risks, Jonathan still clung to his scientific rationale, determined to find logical explanations even amid mounting strangeness. He never could have imagined, as he stood beneath the pale, endless Antarctic sky, that he was about to uncover truths that would not only shatter his skepticism, but would also force him to question everything he ever believed, and eventually place him at the very center of humanity's greatest spiritual battle. As the days turned into weeks at the remote Antarctic research outpost, Dr. Jonathan Carter couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that their scientific exploration was veering into uncharted and forbidden territory. Their initial excitement at being on the cusp of potentially world-changing discoveries gradually gave way to a growing sense of foreboding. The regular pulses they detected beneath the ice, precisely every 108 minutes, continued without fail, as rhythmic and steady as a heartbeat. No known geological activity could account for such exact periodicity, a fact that gnawed persistently at Jonathan's disciplined scientific mind. Each pulse sent a faint vibration up through the thick soles of his insulated boots, a subtle reminder of an unknown force buried 2.5 miles beneath the frozen surface, where temperatures plummeted to a bone-chilling -76 degrees Fahrenheit. Soon, unexplained incidents began to ripple through the camp like a quiet contagion. First, the sophisticated ground-penetrating radar, meticulously calibrated by engineers with decades of experience, started malfunctioning. Screens flickered erratically, displaying images distorted by strange, ghostly patterns that defied technical explanation. The team's GPS units, once reliably precise, inexplicably indicated locations hundreds of miles away, leaving the experienced researchers disoriented and anxious. Even the camp's high-frequency communication system, designed to withstand Antarctica's harsh conditions, crackled with static, occasionally capturing faint whispers that sent chills racing down Jonathan's spine. At night, he would lie awake in his narrow bunk, straining to decipher the barely audible murmurs that filled the silence. Fragments of speech in no language he could recognize, layered softly beneath the relentless Antarctic winds. Those eerie sounds seemed to swirl around him, almost tangible, as though invisible beings moved through the shadows of the camp, whispering secrets just beyond the reach of human understanding. Members of Jonathan's team started experiencing unusual physical symptoms: persistent headaches, sudden nausea, dizziness, and bouts of insomnia that left them drained and visibly shaken. Conversations in the mess tent grew hushed and tense, as each scientist quietly admitted feelings of unease, reporting strange dreams that felt all too real. A veteran engineer, Mike Anderson, a man known for his stoicism and steadiness under pressure, confided to Jonathan one morning that he had seen shadows moving silently along the perimeter fence. Figures tall and impossibly thin, their presence utterly devoid of warmth. Mike's hands trembled slightly as he spoke, his eyes reflecting genuine fear, an emotion Jonathan had never before seen in the normally calm engineer. It was clear the harsh environment and isolation were taking a toll, Yet Jonathan suspected there was far more at play than mere psychological stress. One evening, while meticulously examining seismic data in the isolated research trailer, Jonathan made a disturbing discovery. The team's drill, advanced and powerful enough to penetrate deep into the Antarctic ice, had reached precisely 12,700 feet below the surface, a depth at which, according to all known geological records, the ice should have been solid and stable. Yet their equipment indicated large pockets of void space beneath, vast, cavernous areas impossible to explain naturally. More troubling, infrared readings showed heat signatures emanating from deep beneath the ice, registering nearly 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Impossibly warm for an environment buried beneath millions of tons of frozen ice and snow, untouched by sunlight or geothermal heat sources. Jonathan stared at the data for hours, feeling his pulse quicken. All of his life, he'd trusted empirical evidence, observable facts, and rational explanations. But these anomalous readings challenged every scientific principle he held dear. The senior researcher sat back in his chair, suddenly aware of how deeply alone they were, thousands of miles from civilization, dependent solely on technology that now seemed unreliable at best, and deliberately misleading at worst. Outside, beyond the small, frosted window of the research trailer, the wind rose with sudden ferocity, shaking the thin walls and howling mournfully, as if echoing the team's collective anxiety. Jonathan stepped into the bitter cold, pulling his heavy coat tighter against the sub-zero wind chill. Gazing out across the endless expanse of white illuminated only by pale moonlight, he saw something impossible. Shadowy figures standing at the edge of the camp, motionless, staring silently back at him. His breath caught sharply, a cloud forming instantly in the frigid air, and he felt an overwhelming wave of dread wash over him. In that chilling moment, Jonathan understood with profound certainty that they had crossed an invisible line. Their relentless scientific curiosity had led them into territory mankind was never meant to enter. Beneath Antarctica's seemingly eternal ice, something ancient and unspeakably dangerous was waking, and Dr. Jonathan Carter feared that he and his team had unwittingly opened the door. On February 14th, 2025, Dr. Jonathan Carter awoke before sunrise, his restless sleep disturbed by recurring nightmares of shadows moving silently beneath the ice, murmuring in strange tongues. He dressed quickly in thermal gear and stepped outside the heated shelter into the bone-chilling Antarctic air, where temperatures had dropped overnight to nearly 40 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Stars above sparkled coldly, distant and indifferent, while the horizon glowed faintly, hinting at a sunrise still hours away. Something within him stirred, a profound unease that no scientific rationalization could silence. Every instinct warned him that their mission had ventured too deeply, touching secrets long buried beneath the ancient ice. Yet, with decades of disciplined scientific training behind him, Jonathan dismissed these thoughts as irrational anxiety brought on by prolonged isolation and stress. After a hurried breakfast in the mess tent, Jonathan joined his colleagues near the primary borehole, designated Drill Site Theta. There, the drilling equipment hummed powerfully, the heavy machinery vibrating the thick ice beneath their insulated boots. By mid-morning, the team had managed to deepen the borehole to an unprecedented 13,000 feet, an astonishing feat that surpassed previous Antarctic drilling records. However, instead of excitement, an unspoken dread hung thickly in the air, visible in the grim expressions and wary eyes of Jonathan's crew. His closest associate, Mike Anderson, carefully monitored the drilling console, visibly tense, his typically steady hands subtly trembling as he watched the depth gauge slowly increasing. At precisely 11:07 a.m., everything changed. A sudden deafening crack reverberated across the ice sheet, shattering the morning's eerie calm. Jonathan staggered, barely managing to keep his balance as the ground beneath his feet trembled violently. Before he could comprehend what was happening, a massive fissure ripped open directly beneath the drilling rig. Thick slabs of ancient ice fractured with terrifying speed, creating a yawning chasm at least 60 feet wide, plunging abruptly downward into inky darkness. Shouts of alarm filled the frigid air as the crew scattered, desperate to escape the widening fissure. Equipment toppled over and heavy machinery slid inexorably toward the edge, vanishing into the abyss with metallic crashes echoing hauntingly as they disappeared from sight. Jonathan froze, momentarily paralyzed by shock as the chaos unfolded around him. He could feel the ice beneath him cracking, splitting, and suddenly he was falling. A sickening sense of weightlessness overtook him as he plunged headlong into the dark chasm, the air whipping past him at dizzying speed. For a brief instant, fear gave way to astonishment, his analytical mind struggling to process the rapid sequence of events. Then came the impact, brutally sudden. Jonathan's body slammed into a protruding shelf of jagged ice nearly 100 feet below the surface. Pain exploded through him, sharp and overwhelming, as bones snapped and internal injuries robbed him of breath. For a fleeting moment, consciousness lingered, just long enough for him to realize he was severely injured, perhaps mortally so. Then, darkness. The next instant, Jonathan's awareness expanded beyond his broken physical body. He found himself floating, detached and weightless, gazing downward at the twisted form lying motionless below. He felt no fear, no pain, only a peculiar sense of calm detachment, as if observing someone else's tragedy from afar. From above, he watched as frantic colleagues shouted his name, their voices distant and muffled, ropes hurriedly lowered into the dark crevasse. But something else soon drew his attention. Figures silently observing the scene from just beyond the team's frantic efforts. Tall, luminescent beings, cloaked in radiant white, emanated an unearthly presence both powerful and strangely gentle. Yet behind them, deeper within the shadows, Jonathan sensed other entities lurking, darker and far more sinister. Twisted shapes slithered through the gloom, emanating cold malevolence, waiting impatiently like predators hungry for prey. Suddenly, a brilliant, comforting light enveloped Jonathan, warmer and more vibrant than the brightest sunshine. Within this pure radiance, a figure appeared, majestic, powerful, and profoundly compassionate. Jonathan instantly recognized him as Jesus, a presence beyond description, whose very essence resonated with an eternity of infinite love and wisdom. Jonathan's lifetime skepticism crumbled instantly in the face of this divine reality, replaced by an overwhelming sense of awe and humility. "You were not meant to die yet, Jonathan." Jesus spoke, his voice echoing gently yet powerfully throughout Jonathan's consciousness. "There is something I must show you." Jonathan felt himself guided upwards, far above the Antarctic ice, his perspective widening until Earth itself was spread before him, beautiful yet veiled in shadowy illusions. Antarctica appeared startlingly different, no longer merely an endless icy wasteland, but a carefully constructed boundary encircling something hidden, something ancient and immensely dangerous. Jesus revealed to Jonathan the terrifying truth. The Antarctic ice was not simply geological. It was a divinely constructed barrier, placed millennia ago to imprison fallen entities who had rebelled long before humanity existed. The rhythmic pulses Jonathan's team had measured were not geological anomalies but signs of these entities stirring, awakened by humanity's reckless exploration. "The seals that bind them are breaking," Jesus continued solemnly. "Your kind has reached beyond the limits set for their protection, unknowingly aiding these imprisoned beings in their awakening." Horror filled Jonathan's soul as visions of future deception overwhelmed him. Humanity deceived by promises of advanced technology, healing, immortality, gifts from entities who were neither benevolent nor divine, but fallen creatures, intent on mankind's spiritual enslavement. Jesus warned Jonathan that this deception would culminate in humanity willingly surrendering their connection with God, embracing an irreversible spiritual trap disguised as evolutionary progress. Gripped by sorrow, Jonathan turned to Jesus in desperation. "How can we stop this?" Jesus' gaze, filled with infinite compassion, fixed upon him steadily. "You cannot stop what has been prophesied, but you must return and warn those who will listen. Many will not believe you, but some hearts will heed the truth before it is too late." A sudden, gentle push sent Jonathan spiraling downward, rapidly returning to his shattered body. The radiant warmth faded abruptly, replaced by searing pain as his consciousness violently slammed back into flesh and bone. Gasps and frantic voices filled his ears as medical personnel surrounded him, astonished by his inexplicable revival after 12 full minutes without a pulse. Opening his eyes, Jonathan saw blurred faces staring back, faces that had assumed him lost forever. Yet, even amidst agony, a newfound sense of purpose flooded his soul. He knew now what lay beneath Antarctica's deceptive ice, knew the terrifying truth behind humanity's coming trials. With each painful breath, Dr. Jonathan Carter understood that his life had been forever changed, not simply by the catastrophic incident, but by the divine revelation entrusted to him. He had returned not only from physical death, but from a blindness of spirit, bearing an urgent message that he alone could share with the world. The days following Dr. Jonathan Carter's miraculous revival were filled with disbelief, confusion, and suspicion. Despite his weakened condition, every night he sat propped up in his hospital bed, haunted by the vivid visions he'd been shown beyond the veil of death. Those around him whispered about his mind possibly being damaged from the lack of oxygen during those 12 lifeless minutes beneath Antarctica's frozen surface. Doctors, clad in crisp white lab coats, carefully hinted at neurological anomalies. Even some of his closest colleagues began questioning his sanity, their eyes filled with uneasy skepticism whenever he spoke of the profound experience that had irrevocably changed him. Each night, as Jonathan lay awake beneath sterile fluorescent lights, he found himself trapped between two worlds: the tangible reality of beeping monitors and intravenous drips, and the harrowing realm he'd glimpsed, an eternity of piercing truths he couldn't unsee. He vividly remembered the faces of the dark entities beneath the ice, the pulse of ancient malevolence so powerful that even recalling it sent chills racing along his spine. He knew that these were not merely hallucinations conjured by a traumatized mind. They were warnings etched into his soul, revelations of a deception already beginning to creep into society. The first undeniable sign appeared less than 2 weeks after Jonathan returned to consciousness. Early one morning, as sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting long, narrow stripes of gold across the tile floor, a television bolted to the corner of the ceiling flickered to life. Jonathan watched, chest tightening, as a prominent news anchor cheerfully announced a groundbreaking discovery beneath Antarctica's ice. Evidence of a highly advanced civilization, perhaps tens of thousands of years old, has been uncovered. Scientists worldwide are heralding this as potentially the most significant archaeological discovery in human history. Jonathan's heartbeat quickened painfully, his breath growing shallow. He had seen this exact scenario unfold during his supernatural encounter. This was the first step, a carefully orchestrated release of seemingly innocuous information designed to intrigue and captivate humanity. The public was meant to feel excitement, curiosity, and hope. Yet Jonathan alone understood the sinister reality lurking behind these carefully crafted announcements. Within days, the media erupted into fevered speculation. News networks debated endlessly, discussing the astonishing artifacts unearthed by international teams deep beneath the ice. Scientific panels buzzed about potential implications for human history and evolution. Anchors speculated excitedly about humanity's future, hinting that perhaps we had finally uncovered evidence of our own extraterrestrial origins. Public enthusiasm grew rapidly, the narrative perfectly crafted to tap into mankind's innate desire to understand its purpose, to connect with something larger than itself. Yet beneath all the excitement lay the carefully concealed darkness, the cold reality Jonathan had witnessed firsthand. Desperate to intervene, Jonathan began speaking to anyone who would listen: family, nurses, even fellow patients during therapy sessions. He described the real horrors beneath the ice, the imprisoned fallen entities, the divine seals meant to contain their ancient evil, and the monumental deception intended to enslave humanity. Initially, some people were intrigued, others simply polite. But as Jonathan pressed on, becoming increasingly urgent, reactions turned cold and dismissive. His daughter, Emily, visited often, holding his weathered hands in hers, her eyes filled with sorrow and growing concern. "Dad," she whispered softly, "maybe it's best to let these things rest. You're still healing. The doctors say trauma can cause vivid hallucinations." Jonathan squeezed Emily's hand, tears forming in his tired eyes, his voice firm with conviction despite the trembling of his weakened body. "This is no hallucination, Emily. I've seen what lies beneath Antarctica's ice. I've felt their presence, their intentions. I can't remain silent. Too many souls are at stake." But soon enough, resistance to Jonathan's warnings escalated from quiet skepticism to active interference. One afternoon, two sharply dressed men appeared unannounced at his hospital bedside. They identified themselves as agents from a government agency Jonathan had never heard of. Their tone was superficially polite, yet chillingly authoritative. They spoke calmly, their expressions carefully neutral, yet their message was crystal clear. "Dr. Carter," said one agent, his eyes cold and piercing, "your recent statements have been causing unnecessary distress. We understand you experienced severe trauma, but misinformation during this sensitive time could have damaging consequences. It's best you remain quiet about your alleged experiences." Jonathan felt a surge of righteous anger rising within him, but he kept his voice steady and resolute. "I won't be silenced. The truth I saw is real, and people must be warned. What you're presenting as a discovery is no blessing. It is a profound spiritual threat." The second agent, who had remained quiet, leaned forward, lowering his voice almost to a whisper. "Doctor, consider your position carefully. This is your only warning." They left without another word, leaving Jonathan shaken but determined. He now fully understood the extent of what he was facing: a meticulously prepared deception, reinforced by powerful interests working tirelessly behind the scenes to control public perception. He began to recognize their handiwork everywhere: in television documentaries promoting theories of ancient aliens, popular scientific publications gradually introducing concepts of humanity's engineered evolution, even subtle shifts in church doctrines, gently questioning traditional beliefs in favor of a more inclusive, universal spirituality. Despite physical exhaustion and emotional strain, Jonathan grew even more committed to his mission. He poured his remaining strength into writing letters, recording video messages, and posting online testimonies aimed at warning whoever would listen. At first, reactions were limited mostly to ridicule or outright dismissal, labeling him a conspiracy theorist or unstable. But slowly, among the tidal wave of skepticism, voices emerged, quiet, yet persistent. Some pastors, veterans, retired teachers, grandmothers from rural towns across America began reaching out. They wrote to him, sent him messages, even visited in secret, expressing that something in Jonathan's warnings resonated deep within their spirits. They sensed an unsettling darkness growing beneath the surface of society's newfound enthusiasm for Antarctica's discoveries. Even as his health steadily declined, Jonathan found hope in these courageous souls, often aged over 65, who, despite being marginalized or ridiculed themselves, chose to trust his revelation. With determination that defied his age and physical weakness, Jonathan pressed onward, his life now entirely devoted to spreading the truth he had been given in the presence of Christ himself. He knew, deep in his heart, that the deception would soon escalate, tempting humanity with irresistible promises of immortality, miraculous health, and unity, offers appealing directly to mankind's deepest fears and desires. As he penned his letters each evening beneath the sterile glow of hospital lights, Jonathan Carter understood clearly the weight of his mission. He had become not just a witness to humanity's greatest hidden threat, but a solitary voice in the wilderness, calling out against a growing storm of deception. He knew he might never see the final outcome, yet he felt peace. He had spoken truth boldly, without fear, and though the deception would soon engulf much of humanity, his words would linger, lighting a path for those who chose to seek truth amidst darkness. As the weeks passed, Dr. Jonathan Carter's warnings reverberated quietly across small towns and quiet living rooms, through whispered conversations in church pews, and in hushed discussions over morning coffee at roadside diners across America. While major news networks trumpeted thrilling discoveries beneath Antarctica's frozen plains, Jonathan's voice, though faint, steadily gained traction among those who still valued discernment and faith over sensational headlines. Men and women in their 60s, 70s, and even older, having witnessed enough historical upheavals and human folly, found Jonathan's message to be unsettlingly familiar. It echoed a timeless truth. Not everything presented as progress truly is. In rural communities scattered from the Great Plains to the foothills of Appalachia, people instinctively sensed the undercurrent of unease hidden beneath the media frenzy. They remembered the promises made by countless politicians and prophets of so-called progress throughout their lifetimes, promises that often unraveled into bitter disillusionment. Jonathan's story resonated deeply, connecting with their long-standing belief that genuine truth always comes with quiet conviction, not blaring fanfare. Gradually, an informal network began to take shape. People committed to keeping the message alive, passing Jonathan's accounts of divine revelation from neighbor to neighbor, from congregation to congregation. Meanwhile, in bustling cities from New York to San Francisco, the grand narrative crafted by mainstream media and influential organizations continued its careful, deliberate progression. Television specials aired nightly, highlighting detailed imagery from beneath Antarctica's massive ice sheets, revealing intricate, colossal structures buried miles beneath the surface. Supposedly evidence of an advanced, enlightened civilization predating humanity. National Geographic ran glossy, spectacular articles, featuring photographs of ancient artifacts carefully positioned to stir the imagination of millions. Famous actors and influential figures appeared regularly on primetime talk shows, passionately describing how the discovery would redefine humanity's very understanding of itself. Slowly, subtly, public opinion began to shift. The once skeptical became intrigued, the indifferent captivated. Universities held conferences speculating openly about how these beings, described increasingly as benevolent guides from humanity's forgotten past, would usher in a new golden age. Even religious institutions were not immune. Some prominent ministers and spiritual leaders, eager to stay relevant, began incorporating these supposed revelations into their sermons, cautiously suggesting that perhaps traditional religious teachings had always hinted at this cosmic unity. To their dismay, congregations began dividing. Families debated passionately over dinner tables. Grandparents argued quietly with grandchildren. Pastors struggled to reconcile new popular beliefs with timeless, spiritual truths. But through all this, Jonathan's urgent message persisted. Retired veterans, grandparents, church elders, and community leaders who had lived long enough to remember lessons taught by hardship and history quietly banded together. They weren't easily swayed by slick documentaries or charismatic speakers. They trusted the testimony of one man who had stared directly into eternity and returned bearing a powerful message of caution. Though Jonathan remained under constant surveillance, often receiving anonymous threats, his words still filtered outward, spreading courageously, whispered like precious secrets in diners, VFW halls, and retirement centers across America. In a small town nestled among the Ozarks, 76-year-old Reverend Samuel Bennett became one of Jonathan's strongest allies. A Vietnam veteran with deep, unwavering faith, Samuel had seen firsthand how easily humanity could be deceived by bright promises hiding darker intentions. One crisp autumn Sunday morning, Samuel stepped carefully to the front of his modest white-steepled church, supported by a simple wooden cane worn smooth by years of faithful service. His congregation, mostly elderly, waited quietly as sunlight poured gently through stained glass windows depicting Christ's suffering and redemption. Samuel's voice trembled slightly with age, but the authority in his tone held every heart captive. "Friends," he began softly, "many of you have asked me about these revelations beneath Antarctica. You've seen the news. You've heard famous people declaring that humanity is finally discovering our true origins, that our faith has perhaps been incomplete all these centuries." He paused, eyes sweeping gently across the faces he had shepherded faithfully for decades. "But I tell you today, beware. Truth doesn't always arrive draped in splendor and praised by crowds. Often it comes quietly, through whispers in the wilderness, through humble servants who carry scars from their journey." Reverend Bennett unfolded a handwritten letter, carefully smoothing out the creases. It had come directly from Jonathan himself. Samuel's voice softened further, becoming almost intimate, like a father addressing beloved children. Dr. Carter, a respected scientist, died beneath those Antarctic glaciers. His heart stopped beating for 12 minutes, a time measured and recorded by trained medical professionals. In that brief window between life and death, Jonathan stood face to face with our Lord Jesus Christ. And Christ showed him clearly that this discovery is no blessing, no revelation of enlightenment, but rather the unveiling of a great deception designed to lead humanity astray. The congregation remained perfectly still, a palpable silence filling the humble church. Outside, golden autumn leaves drifted gently to earth, whispering softly in the quiet stillness. Samuel's words were heavy, profound, and deeply unsettling, yet they carried the unmistakable ring of truth. "In every age," Samuel continued slowly, "the greatest danger is not blatant evil, but deception masquerading as good. These ancient entities trapped beneath the ice. They were sealed away by divine authority. Humanity's arrogance, believing itself capable of mastering all things, has awakened them. Soon, they'll come bearing miraculous technologies, cures for disease, promises of immortality. Many will embrace these beings as gods, as saviors. But this path leads not to liberation, but to spiritual bondage." His words echoed through the small chapel, carried into the hearts of men and women who had lived through world wars, economic depressions, political turmoil, and relentless social change. They recognized with sobering clarity the patterns repeating throughout history, the seduction of utopian promises, the tragic allure of false idols. Slowly, quietly, the faithful began organizing, inspired by Jonathan Carter's brave testimony and Reverend Bennett's steady leadership. Prayer groups formed, community meetings convened, and quiet resistance began spreading like a steady, hopeful flame across America. People gathered in homes, schools, and church halls, educating younger generation. In a humble hospital room hundreds of miles away, Jonathan Carter lay quietly, aware that his health was fading rapidly. Yet peace filled his heart. He had accomplished his purpose. He had shared the truth entrusted to him by Christ himself. As he drifted into sleep, Jonathan felt an assurance that his labor would not be in vain, that despite overwhelming odds, those who had chosen to heed his warning would continue standing firm. He knew that while many would fall victim to the great deception, a remnant would endure, holding fast to truth until the very end, waiting patiently, faithfully, for the fulfillment of divine promise. As the first hints of spring broke through the stubborn cold, the deceptive promise that had enthralled the nation deepened into something more sinister and absolute. Dr. Jonathan Carter's quiet warnings and Reverend Samuel Bennett's earnest sermons had managed to stir courage and caution among communities throughout America, especially in rural towns and tight-knit neighborhoods where traditions were honored and common sense still held sway. Yet, despite their relentless efforts, the seductive allure of what had been uncovered beneath Antarctica's vast, frozen wilderness now permeated every aspect of society. At every turn, television screens and radios proclaimed a new dawn for humanity, one defined by seemingly benevolent beings, offering mankind unprecedented prosperity and healing through miraculous technology. Across the nation, a carefully constructed narrative unfolded. These entities beneath the ice were portrayed as humanity's original benefactors, guides who had shaped civilization thousands of years before, now ready to help humanity ascend once more. Politicians and celebrities appeared on national news channels, their faces filled with excitement, passionately endorsing the gifts these beings promised. Endless talk shows showcased emotional reunions between terminally ill patients and families now miraculously cured by advanced biotechnology, effortlessly blending truth and fiction to captivate the American public. The rhetoric was smooth, appealing, crafted meticulously to soften doubts and silence dissent. Soon, what began as voluntary enthusiasm rapidly evolved into an overwhelming social expectation. And quietly, subtly, a division emerged. Those willing to embrace this so-called enlightenment, and those who cautiously resisted. Dr. Carter's prophetic warnings were no longer merely ignored. Now they were openly mocked, ridiculed by popular media and influential commentators. Why cling to superstition and fear? Asked charismatic talk show hosts, when the keys to a brighter future lie within our reach. Yet even amidst this tidal wave of cultural pressure, groups of steadfast believers, mostly men and women in their 60s, 70s, and beyond, stood firm, gathering quietly in homes, churches, and community halls, holding fast to what they knew to be true. They saw clearly what many younger generations had not yet learned, that genuine progress was rooted in integrity and humility, not prideful shortcuts and easy answers. By late March, nationwide announcements revealed the entities beneath Antarctica would soon openly present themselves. Celebrations were planned, parades scheduled, and American cities prepared jubilantly, hanging banners and erecting grandstands to welcome what they called humanity's long-awaited reunion. Yet away from bright city lights and media glamour, small communities across America's heartland reacted differently. Many senior citizens, who had lived through the turbulence of war, economic hardship, and cultural upheaval, instinctively sensed danger. They recognized that genuine hope and progress rarely arrived with such aggressive marketing and manufactured enthusiasm. In a quiet community in Iowa, 81-year-old Mary Thornton carefully hosted a gathering at her modest farmhouse, surrounded by fields freshly plowed and waiting patiently for spring planting. Mary had buried her husband years ago, alongside her parents and many dear friends. Now she lived alone, yet remained a pillar of strength, wisdom, and clarity for her neighbors. That evening, her living room overflowed with older men and women, mostly in their 70s and 80s, some leaning gently on canes or sitting attentively with hearing aids adjusted carefully. The atmosphere was solemn yet determined, illuminated softly by lamps whose warm glow matched the quiet strength radiating from Mary herself. She spoke clearly and steadily, her voice carrying decades of experience. "My friends," Mary began softly, "we've all heard the promises these beings are making. Health restored, bodies made new, no more pain or disease. And I know some of our children, even grandchildren, have been caught up in this excitement." Her gaze traveled slowly around the room, connecting with each face. "But we must remember that we've seen promises like these before. Glittering assurances wrapped beautifully but hollow within. Truth is never sold like this. Truth comes quietly, often painfully, earned through years of faith, endurance, and wisdom." Jonathan Carter risked his life and reputation because he knew these promises conceal something dark. She paused, allowing her words to sink deeply into hearts seasoned by a lifetime of trial, endurance, and faith. "We now face a choice, not a simple one, nor a popular one. Many of our loved ones will rush forward, believing they have found heaven on earth. And as painful as it will be, we must remain anchored in what we know is right, not what's merely convenient or easy." Quiet murmurs rippled through the room, accompanied by gentle nods of agreement. Stories followed, memories from wars, times of economic turmoil, personal tragedies when they had clung desperately to faith, emerging stronger and wiser because of it. Each voice added depth to their collective determination, each testimony reinforcing their shared resolve. Meanwhile, in bustling cities and suburban neighborhoods, excitement continued building relentlessly toward the entity's grand public appearance, now set for April 15th, a date chosen symbolically, coinciding with spring, representing renewal and rebirth. Media outlets ramped up coverage, saturating television screens with uplifting stories of miraculous recoveries, innovative technology that promised agelessness, and visions of peace and global unity. Few questioned the cost of this promised utopia, or paused to consider deeper implications. With excitement and pressure mounting, even traditional churches began wavering, some openly endorsing the entities as agents of divine grace, reinterpreting scripture to align neatly with popular enthusiasm. But in homes like Mary's across America, faithful men and women quietly prepared their hearts for what was coming next. They knew instinctively that this new paradise was an illusion, that beneath the slick promises lay the severing of humanity's spiritual bond with the divine. Their gatherings were not about fear or despair, but sober preparation, bolstered by scripture and historical truths handed down through generations. On the evening before the entity's arrival, Jonathan Carter, weakened and frail from declining health, sat quietly beside Reverend Bennett. They met in Samuel's modest home overlooking the quiet Ozark Hills, the setting sun painting the horizon in vivid hues of orange and purple. Jonathan spoke softly, his voice tired but strong in its conviction. "Samuel, tomorrow they will welcome deception openly. They'll think they have found heaven, but they've only opened the gates of spiritual bondage." Samuel nodded solemnly. "But Jonathan, your words have reached more hearts than you may realize. The faithful are prepared. No matter how lonely the road becomes, many have chosen to remain steadfast. They won't falter." Jonathan smiled faintly, a sense of deep peace settling upon him. "Then our task has not been in vain. Those who remain faithful, no matter how few, will preserve the truth for generations still unborn." As the next day's dawn broke, vibrant celebrations erupted nationwide. Music played loudly, crowds gathered eagerly, and television cameras captured every jubilant moment. Yet quietly, in small homes and country churches, elders and faithful souls bowed their heads in solemn prayer, fully aware that humanity now faced the greatest test of discernment in its history. For them, the choice was clear, deeply anchored in a truth revealed through sacrifice, humility, and divine grace. Across America, the dividing line became starkly visible, a nation mesmerized by alluring promises on one side, and on the other, a courageous remnant standing faithfully, refusing to exchange eternal truths for temporary comforts. As celebrations thundered across major cities, Mary Thornton knelt gently beside her chair, whispering a quiet prayer echoed by countless faithful souls scattered throughout the heartland. Lord, give us strength, help us stay faithful, and guide those who have lost their way back home. Outside, gentle rains nourished fields awaiting the plow, a quiet assurance that despite the world's folly, seeds planted in humility and truth would someday bear fruit again. In the stillness, a comforting promise echoed softly through Mary's heart, a promise shared silently among countless faithful Americans, that though darkness might reign for a moment, truth and faith would ultimately triumph. As twilight deepened across the American landscape, the nation stood at an unprecedented crossroads. Bright banners, resplendent with false hope, fluttered above crowded city squares, their vibrant colors masking a hidden darkness. The entities from beneath Antarctica had openly emerged, captivating millions with their elegant promises of renewal, perfect health, and technological miracles. In bustling metropolitan areas like New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, elaborate celebrations erupted as multitudes eagerly accepted the mark, fully convinced that their lives would soon become pain-free and ageless. Influential media networks broadcast constant streams of jubilant faces, while celebrities and politicians appeared hand in hand, celebrating humanity's supposed new dawn. Yet, in stark contrast to this exuberance, quiet resistance steadily grew among smaller towns and rural communities, places steeped in tradition, where wisdom gleaned from generations of hardship had not been forgotten. In the modest Iowa farmhouse where Mary Thornton held steadfast prayer meetings, neighbors continued gathering regularly, their hearts resolutely anchored in truth. Mary's gentle yet unwavering voice inspired courage among her friends, reminding them to rely on wisdom earned through life's trials rather than fleeting promises. Each evening, beneath an antique brass lamp glowing softly atop her worn kitchen table, Mary read aloud from an old family Bible, words that resonated deeply within hearts that had weathered wars, oppressions, and personal tragedies. "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial," she read softly, her eyes bright with quiet determination. Her neighbors nodded silently, feeling their inner resolve strengthen with every familiar scripture verse. Though often dismissed by mainstream society, these faithful seniors formed the spiritual backbone of America's heartland. Their quiet, steadfast resistance like roots sunk deep into fertile soil, unseen yet immovable. Elsewhere, Jonathan Carter, weakened yet defiant despite declining health, felt the enormity of the task still resting upon his aging shoulders. From his modest Arkansas home, nestled quietly among the Ozarks' wooded hillsides, he continued spreading his urgent message through small radio broadcasts and printed pamphlets. "Beware," he warned gently, his voice trembling with sincerity. "What the world now celebrates is not salvation, but spiritual bondage dressed cleverly as progress. We must cling to faith, no matter the cost." Alongside him stood Reverend Samuel Bennett, whose unshakable sermons inspired congregations scattered throughout the South and Midwest to resist deception's siren call. Together, these two courageous men served as beacons, guiding scattered communities through the dense fog of deception, threatening America's very soul. Across the country, quiet acts of bravery multiplied daily, especially among America's seniors, whose wisdom and memories stretched back through decades of hard-won experience. In New England villages, Elderly couples quietly refused the mark, calmly enduring scorn from younger relatives who labeled them outdated or overly cautious. In Midwestern farming communities, families rallied behind their grandparents, respecting their choices even when societal pressures became overwhelming. In southern towns, church bells tolled softly on Sundays, resonating with deep spiritual clarity, summoning believers to prayerful resistance. For those aged 65 and above, who had witnessed history unfold through countless trials, truth remained unaltered by popular opinion or the glittering spectacle that captivated younger generations. Yet the pressure to conform increased daily. Those refusing the entity's promised upgrade gradually faced growing isolation. Without the mark, accessing basic services, healthcare, and banking became progressively difficult. Financial systems and grocery stores adopted policies subtly punishing those who resisted, branding them as backwards or problematic. Hospitals refused treatments without the mark, claiming it was essential to ensure public health and safety. Families grew divided, and friendships strained as society's narrative demanded compliance above conscience. Yet, through this quiet persecution, faithful men and women held firm, understanding that true freedom was spiritual rather than physical, and worth every sacrifice. One clear spring evening, Jonathan Carter addressed a small, dedicated gathering of seniors in Reverend Bennett's rural church. Candles flickered softly on oak pews polished smooth by generations. His voice trembled slightly, yet carried the depth and wisdom of someone who understood the seriousness of this final spiritual test. "My friends," Jonathan said quietly, gripping the wooden pulpit firmly, "we now stand at history's crossroads. The world we once knew, guided by faith, decency, and trust in something greater, has shifted beneath our feet. Many are choosing comfort over conviction, convenience over truth." He paused, his eyes scanning weathered faces reflecting lives defined by integrity, sacrifice, and unwavering principles. Yet here we remain, steadfast, choosing the harder path, the narrow road. And though the world may mock or persecute us, never forget this: light is strongest precisely when darkness seems deepest. As his words resonated within their hearts, quiet tears trickled down lined faces, filled with gentle strength. They nodded silently, encouraged by a bond stronger than blood, the shared faith sustaining them through this unprecedented era. Later that night, gathered outside beneath endless starry skies above the rolling Ozark Hills, the group joined hands in fervent prayer. Their whispered petitions rose quietly into the cool air, mingling gently with a chorus of crickets and rustling leaves. As they prayed, comfort washed over them, a quiet assurance that their courage would endure despite all that might follow. Months passed, and across America, the distinction between darkness and light became increasingly stark. Urban centers flourished under a carefully orchestrated illusion, while pockets of quiet resistance faced escalating hardships. Yet throughout it all, elderly men and women like Mary Thornton, Jonathan Carter, and Samuel Bennett stood unwavering, embodying strength born from lifetimes devoted to truth, integrity, and humility. Gradually, their quiet persistence began influencing younger generations, awakening many to the peril hidden beneath society's flashy promises. The legacy they forged was subtle yet profound, quietly reminding America that real strength is often found not in conformity, but in quiet resistance and steadfast faith. Eventually, Jonathan Carter peacefully passed away one summer evening, his legacy securely established through countless hearts, transformed by his tireless witness. At his funeral, Reverend Bennett shared powerful words that captured their collective journey beautifully. "Jonathan taught us," he spoke clearly, "that truth requires courage, that wisdom often comes quietly, through patient endurance rather than easy answers. He showed us the strength hidden within quiet faithfulness, a strength capable of resisting even the greatest deceptions. As the nation moved forward, many continued blindly embracing the deceptive paradise offered by these entities. But across America, thousands quietly resisted, inspired deeply by the examples set forth by men and women who bravely refused to exchange eternal truths for temporary pleasures. In towns and churches across the heartland, America's faithful seniors continued quietly guiding younger generations back toward truth and wisdom, ensuring their nation's spiritual legacy remained secure. Amidst profound cultural upheaval, one comforting truth resonated clearly. Darkness might momentarily captivate a nation, but genuine light, unpretentious yet unyielding, would always guide hearts toward home. And this quiet truth, embodied so powerfully by America's faithful seniors, remained undiminished, providing enduring strength to those willing to resist deception's seductive promises. At its heart, this narrative offers profound wisdom about courage, integrity, and spiritual discernment, values deeply resonant for those who've witnessed decades of life's complexities. It reminds us that genuine truth often arrives quietly, whispering through subtle conviction rather than shouting loudly amid the noise of popular opinion. Just as Jonathan Carter, Mary Thornton, and Reverend Bennett stood resiliently against seductive false promises, we are encouraged to maintain unwavering faith, even when the path grows difficult and loneliness sets in. The story underscores the importance of valuing timeless principles above fleeting comforts, teaching us that true wisdom emerges from steadfastness, humility, and the courage to resist conformity. Especially for an older audience who've witnessed shifting values over generations, this message reinforces that authentic freedom is rooted not in external approval or convenience, but in steadfast spiritual truths. It is a powerful reminder to cherish integrity and to remain alert, recognizing when something appealing on the surface masks deeper, hidden dangers. Ultimately, the narrative gently assures us that our influence, no matter how quiet or seemingly unnoticed, has enduring power, guiding younger generations back toward wisdom, truth, and lasting strength. Even when the world changes rapidly around us, our steadfast courage in defending what truly matters remains our greatest legacy, offering profound reassurance that our most significant contributions often unfold quietly, yet powerfully, through persistent faithfulness and moral clarity.